Welcome to Whitestone Missionary Baptist Church for our Sunday School lesson presentation for the week. Thank you to our media ministry team, which consists of 4, headed by Reverend Henderson. And we want to thank our trustees, along with Whitestone, for sponsoring this online presentation. And for those of you who have tuned in or will tune in later or have tuned in later at your convenience, we hope that you've had a good week, that you will have a safe and cautious 4th of July celebration. This is the 107th session or lesson session, the 5th one for the summer quarter. The subject this week is Haggai calls for faithful service. The key word is faithful, committed. The Bible text on this subject is based on Haggai chapter 1, the first 11 verses. The theme for Haggai is rebuilding the temple. July's theme is faithful prophecy. Again, the key word is faithful. The summer quarter theme is servants and healers. The golden text is based on verses 3 and 4 of the lesson text. Let me read those 2 verses. Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this lie waste? Dahlquist, one of our lesson commentators, stated, the problem was priority. I think this is what most people in our modern society, and probably ever since it's been people, we do things for ourselves, or at least we try to get for ourselves, and then we give God whatever time we have left. And that doesn't work with God. And perhaps a lot of things bad, when it happens to us, some of us never really get the message. And the lesson points this out. The text is clear on this. He says the problem, or the people, focused on the good and ignored the better. God's house. The better thing to do is take care of God's house first, and then concern yourself with yours later. God needs to be first in their lives, and God needs to be first in our lives. The chief commentator for the week is Keith E. Eggard. The lesson is divided into 2 outlines, or 2 sections. Section 1, the people's attitude, verses 1 through 6. And verses 1 and 2 talks about a false view of timing. Verses 3 and 4 I just mentioned, so I don't need to go over that. Verses 5 and 6, the last 2 verses of the first section or first outline, are challenged to rethink their timing. It is never bad time to do things for God first, or to take Him serious and take Him first. Section 2 covers the last few verses, 7 through 11, God's response to their attitude. Now notice, the people had an attitude, and then God had a response to their attitude, and it was not a good attitude. God was in no mood to play with people when they disregard and disrespect Him. God's will declared, verses 7 and 8. Then verse 9 talks about God's chastening explained. We know as a chastisement or correction. The last 2 verses of the text, God's action detailed. He explained it specifically. Keywords defined in this lesson text: priority. And we live again in a society where people have mixed up priorities, and they only need God or need somebody that can help them after it's too late, most of the time. Priority means order or rank of concern or importance. Seal, now it doesn't spell like it's pronounced C-I-E-L-E-D, seal, to cover over. In other words, they had furnished their houses, and the Lord's house for 16 years laid in waste. Emphatic, direct, forcible rather, to be strong in content, to be strong in message. Admonish, to warn, to strongly criticize, to draw the line. Challenge means to confront, to test, to object or contest an issue or a person or an attitude. Attitude means our mental outlook, our mood, our mindset, our point of view. Service to aid, to help, to be useful, or to find oneself useful, or to be usefulness, or to have, or to demonstrate usefulness toward God in his cause for salvation for our soul. Faithful, I mentioned that several times, means loyal, reliable, trustworthy. Call, when you see the word call in the scriptures in the context, it means to summon for action or duty. Like the military, Uncle Sam wants you, he calls you to the military. Well, he summons you for action, for duty. Imp, I-M-P, equivalent to a little demon or mischievous child, especially in the ancient time when the text was written. Sown, to plant or planted. On page 51 of the Bible Expositor and Illuminator, Sister Carolyn Robinson Brooks, our superintendent, and Brother William Baskin, our superintendent emeritus. On page 51, Eggert made 4 key points, which really is the summary of the lesson on the front end. It tells us just what God and what the people were up against and how God felt about the people's bad attitude toward his building or his house. Number 1, there's a heaven and hell, and that's a fact. That's biblical. Now, if the Bible is wrong, I won't challenge God on that. There's a heaven and hell. Number 2, the book of truth, which is the Bible, the Holy Scriptures, is full of messages, many, many messages about the hope of heaven through sins forgiven. The whole message of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation is when we sin, it means we turn against God. When we turn against God, whatever way we do it, we need his forgiveness, and the forgiveness comes in the form of salvation. And that is brought to us by God's Son, Jesus Christ. Now, number 3, Jesus, while he was on earth, talked more of hell, or more about hell, than he did heaven. And folk are so nice and nasty and so holy until they don't want to hear the word hell, when people do it all the time. But hell is being separated. That's the common definition for hell, being separated from God. Anytime you're separated from God, you're living in hell. Heaven is peaceful, calm, and great graciousness, kindness, beauty. Wherever God is, that's heaven. Number 4, believing in either hell or heaven is difficult for some people to believe. To believe in either one of them. Some people don't believe in heaven, some people don't believe in hell. Some people believe in only heaven, and some folk only believe in hell if it's somebody they don't like. Page 65 has 10 questions to be answered. At what point in Judah's history did Haggai minister? Short answer, it was not until the coming forth of the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, some 16 years, I left out years, 16 years later that the work began once again and the temple was completed. See Ezra chapter 5 and chapter 6. Number 2, the temple was left incomplete, in an incomplete condition. I left out a word. The temple was left in an incomplete condition. Short answer, why did the people of Judah say this was okay? Now, short answer, they were claiming the time was not yet right for doing so, page 62. That covers that compound question in number 2. Number 3, what did Haggai say they were viewing as their first priority instead of rebuilding the temple? Well, short answer, they made building their personal home the top of their agenda, page 63. Number 4, what phrase did Haggai use several times in challenging the people to think priorities? Short answer, consider your ways. That covers everything. God sent you from the prophet, the message of God through the prophet Haggai. Consider your ways, what you're doing. You need to consider what you're doing. You're making God angry. You're disappointing God. You're causing displeasure in God. Haggai chapter 1, Haggai chapter 2, in chapter 2 verses 15 and 18, page 63. Number 5, what circumstances show that God was not blessing them? There are consequences when we disobey God, when we disrespect him, when we turn against him. And here's the answer. And most people in 2022 don't like to hear it. They sowed plenty of seed to have good crops. But they were not getting those good crops. They were able to eat regularly, but was never sufficient. It was never sufficient. They were able to drink regularly, but there was not enough to satisfy them. They had clothing, but it was not enough to totally provide the covering they needed in order to be warm and comfortable. The money they earned never seemed enough to meet all their needs, and certainly not enough to provide anything extra. Page 63. We live in a time like that now. Real wealthy people are not hurt by whatever we call and define inflation. The real wealthy people, millionaires and billionaires, are not concerned about inflation. The only reason they're concerned about inflation cuts into their profit. The people who are on the low end, on welfare, they're not really concerned about inflation. They don't even know what it is, because the people in the middle class, we're the ones squeezed from both sides. Everything comes from the middle class, because most middle class people are full of debt. We're struggling. We're going from paycheck to paycheck. And the people down at the bottom and the people at the top are drawing from us, drawing all the blood out of us. And people don't see it that way, but it is. The middle class is catching the most problem with this inflation. Number 6, how did God compare their lack to a money bag? How did God compare their lack to a money bag? It was like putting money into a money bag with holes in it. Money went straight through, page 63. Number 7, what did God specifically tell them to do about their situation? Well, short answer, start rebuilding the temple of God right away, page 64. That's how you start the problem that you're having. Start doing what God has asked you to do. Number 8, how did God explain the chastening they were getting from him? In other words, the beating, the whipping. Well, short answer, he did this because they had allowed his house to lie in ruin. I left out a word, page 65. Number 9, what emphatic contrast explained their wrongdoing? Short answer, there is an emphatic contrast between the house of the Lord that lay in ruin and the business of the people in caring for their houses, page 65. And this is why people often struggle. We look at them and we wonder why they commit suicide. They're depressed, they're frustrated, they have a good job, they're making a lot of money, and yet they can hardly eat. And we wonder why, and they wonder why, and we wonder why. And the more you have, and the less you give attention to God, the more it's going to look like it's a little bit, because he's fixed it where you can't enjoy it. Number 10, what specific things had God done to get their attention? Well, short answer, the heavens were sending dew upon the land, the earth was not producing fruit, and a divinely caused drought was affecting many things important to the people, page 65. Now, finally, quotes and notes worth our mention. On page 52, on page 62 that is, Edgar said, in reality, many of the people had little time for the things of God. It exists in our times. Many blessings have come to America over the centuries. Many have come to many different, various kinds of communities. And yet we wonder why we are always bellyaching and crying. Some people have 4 cars at the house. A house 10,000 square feet, and they're still unhappy. Well, in reality, many of the people had little time for the things of God. Eggert also added on page 63, they needed to reappraise their perverted priorities and give preeminence to God and their personal relationship with the Lord God. Dowd, another commentator, listed 3 specific goals for this lesson text. First, we are to see clearly how God used the prophet Haggai to rebuke his people and help them return to him. See, when we turn from God, the message comes to us in various forms through various people. Turn away from what you're doing and turn to God, and you'll see a change in your mindset, in your spirit, and in your physical possessions. Second, we are to show that God's leading and his timing are correct and appropriate, and that there are consequences to our failure to do what he asked us to do. Finally, we are to overcome our fears, to share the will of God with others, and avoid procrastinating in our obedience to Him. We can put it off all we want, but eventually, or sooner or later, we're going to have to deal with God. Now, Don Kakavakos, another one of our commentators, said, our actions, and I think this is the quote of the day or the week, our action, our personal actions, it doesn't have anything to do with what they do in Congress, City Hall, or what the people doing on the corner, down in Walker's Lounge. It has nothing to do with that. Our personal actions, rather than our words, are the best indicator of our priorities. See verses 3 and 4, which is our golden text. Jeff Van Gothium said on page 69, much good will be done if we just rise up and respond, living as Christians in the midst of a needy world. Christina Futrell said, as servants of the Most High, we need to remember why we're here. We're not here to live for ourselves. We're here to live for God. That's hard to get over to people because it was hard for me to get. Finally, I've gotten it. We're not here because of us and any goodness we've done. We're here because God wants us here for His purpose. Under the children's corner on page 73, that's dealing with young children, say between 2.5 to 3 maybe, up to about 7 or 8, but particularly between 3 and 7. Dahlquist said this, as children, ask children to think of something they really want. And every child, every human, regardless of age, wants something in this life. Now then, ask them what they would do if God asked them to give that particular thing they want so much away. The choice would indicate their feelings toward God and their belief in Jesus Christ. No other way around it. Whatever God asks me to give up that I want so bad and I don't want to give it up, that tells God exactly how you feel about Him and about your relationship with Jesus Christ. I wish I could make it simpler, but the bottom line is when you turn against God, we're really treading on dangerous ground. I hope that you would join us in our morning worship later on. I want to thank our media ministry team. God bless you and have a safe holiday weekend.